Welcome everybody. Blessed are those that visit this channel and enjoy the content here.
This is another episode of Talk to Thorin, and for this one I'm joined by Tobias Sherman, also known as Tumba. He is the CEO of Foundry IV, and you might know him also for taking part in creating ELEAGUE on TBS, and he was a long time ago now part of WME IMG. Obviously, back in the days, particularly when it was IMG, where he was an agent, head of esports, whatever title you want to give him. So, Toby, the first thing we're going to talk about here, the general theme, is about this proposal you made that we rebrand esports, or that you at least will be branding esports, to the term new sports. And I saw when you put this out there, it got some traction. Some people were talking about it on social media. Admittedly, not a lot of the conversations went very far. And so I wanted to kind of like dig in a little bit further. Let me start with the first simple question, which actually seems to be the main topic that no one on Twitter was able to get past, Toby, which is what's wrong with the term esports?
Yeah, no, that's a it's a great question. And so I believe that's a matter of perspective. I think if the fans look at it, and that's why I noticed I didn't say, it wasn't a letter to the community. It was a letter to the industry. So for me, I've for the last 9 years advocated for esports and, around the world and really for everybody from the talent to the teams, the players, and sometimes even the publishers. And so the reason for me had been actually what I hadn't shared with anybody was the real germ of this. Where really started the impetus for it was I was talking to Jack Etienne from Cloud9, and he said, I don't know why it just can't be seen as sports. Like, it should just be sports. So for me, I thought, well, how do we keep, what's so special about our community and because it is different. And yet still evolve. So I started using the term new sports, and everybody wants to focus on brands, and that's okay. You can do that. And I used the example because it was the easiest to illustrate my point, which was the fact that it's working with brands. Brands that I've spoken to in the past, now all of a sudden it started to click for them. And so, I had used it here and there for about a month. And the common consensus was that they had liked it better. And so I wouldn't call it a rebrand. I don't want to take what's currently existing. See, if you focus on the title, you would say he's trying to change the name of esports, and that is absolutely incorrect. In my mind, and I think in the mind of anybody that's ever built anything in the space, what it actually is creating something new and sustainable. And it also opens the aperture to make room for, the inevitable products that come when tech collides and continues to collide with sport. So in basic terms saying, no new sports currently exist, right? It's all esports. It's all publishers that are controlling this gateway that everybody's had to beg, to try to get a little bit of some type of product that they could use. And when they get a little bit of product, it goes a whole long way. And now the publishers themselves see it as a revenue source. So what I'm saying is our current iteration, to get to the next level so that business can thrive and there can be sustainability, needs new direction, a new definition, a more comprehensive solution to sort of solving the problems that we've run into. It just so happens, Thorin, the side benefit has been brands have reacted really, really well to it.
Okay, so just on that topic then, when you said that you've actually tried this out already, you've spoken to certain brands, you saw a difference in the reaction. Before we go completely into the new sports side of it, with the old term, if you came to people and you pitched them and you said, hey, this is a thing called esports, here's what it's like, here's a picture of some tournaments, here's the numbers, what weren't they getting, or what was the disconnect with the term esports or the way it was presented before? What do you think the difference was? Because I know a lot of people watching might naively think that all brands are either open to it or they just aren't the sort of person who'd invest in esports. Whereas actually I know myself, brands, some of them that are big brands that have been involved, maybe weren't even involved in the same level they would be with a normal sponsorship. It was, it was a tester. It was a very small one. I can remember a certain famous team sponsored by a massive car manufacturer. I heard some things behind the scenes. Maybe it wasn't the kind of big deal it was presented as. So what would you say on that angle? Like what was esports like? What was the disconnect? What couldn't it get across to people when that term or that way of approaching it came across?
Oh, I love that question because nobody actually asked that. They just said, the term's fine. The term's fine. It reminds me of the meme with the burning room. Everything's fine. But so it was funny. In the thread, I had happened to see that there was an esports team owner that said, I've never had this problem. And the irony of it was, he did have the problem, and he called me to help him when he was originally getting funded. And the entire conversation from the VC we were talking to was, we don't understand esports. Well, stop right there. That's a problem, because at that point you already should have. Now, moving forward, nobody has said the literal word is a problem. It's the preconceived notions that come loaded behind that word.
Okay.
So basically, we spent the next 2 hours of me convincing them it's sports, and this is probably 2 years ago. But my point is, it's not meant to be literal, the word in of itself. It's the meaning behind it. So you asked about the disconnect and sort of the problem, and I think, listen, there is no greater evidence that there is an issue than what you just sort of intimated toward, which was the fact that, well, if there wasn't a disconnect, we have the audience, we have the numbers, we have the live events. Why aren't we getting the money? Right? And so I think that's the reason. And there's the evidence right there. Everything is not fine. Everything is not okay in the pitch room. And if you've actually done the pitches you say you have, you'd know that. Because guess what? The people that have done the pitches support this because they know it. If you look at Dan Chacon, if you look at, heck, I think there was a person from Blizzard Licensing that liked the article on LinkedIn. Hector came out in support because he's done the pitches. So anybody that's actually pitched these brands or these sports teams understands that there is a massive disconnect that is created. And we have to build bridges, because the other side of it is, you see people get worked up into a tizzy and they say, maybe they resort to the name calling or the venom, and that's fine. But, they come back and they say things like, it's they should bend to our will. They need to learn us. Well, why? Why not break down those walls and create, opportunity for everybody that's much easier? And I think that's what new sports does. When I use the term new sports, and I encourage everybody to just, if you're in a pitch or if you're in a room with a new brand, give it a shot and see how they respond. Don't judge it on the word itself or the idea itself. Try it for yourself. You know what I mean? See how it works. But for me, it's more than just a word. It's an ethos. So the disconnect, to answer your question, I think is all these big brands have this preconceived notion that it's video games. And I don't look at it that way. Right. And I think esports, they think video games. New sports stops that. Esports, they think, then the next thing they figure out is esports, they think game publisher, right? They don't think athlete. And I think new sports, again, changes that narrative. So those are some of the preconceived blockers that are in the way. It's all those generalizations that the decision makers, the C-level execs, either at the sports brands or at the sports team owners, that can't get across. And I'll wrap up on that point by saying that, if you want to try to isolate us from the brands, that's fine, but somebody has to pay for this, right? Like, that's what people forget, is they are vitally important that they understand this. To say that sports could exist without them is ridiculous. And it's not just brands. I let off with them. It's getting into the issues that I'm sure we'll ask about later, but it's media also. There's a lot of different components to this. Brands are just the easiest to articulate because they pay for the show.
Okay. So one thing you said there about the fact that, like, when you say esports, the preconception is video games. Like, it's not video game tournaments. It's not, there's an industry. This is a circuit. It's kind of like a sport, but with video games. That's actually something I've always wondered about myself, because I notice even in the modern day where you see massive esports tournaments, and surely, someone must have read a newspaper article by now or seen something. It's amazing how many people, when you explain it to them, it's even the premise they can't understand. Like, I've met a lot of people in my life who understood the concept of video games, and then when you told them what esports was, the thing I think they could never get over is they always seemed to think they didn't understand there was a pro circuit and there was like a whole world of the competitive side. It's like they almost thought if you said there's a big computer game tournament, like one of the first things they would even ask me when I said I'm going as like a commentator or whatever, they'd be like, and are you going to play as well? It'd be like, Well, no, no, it's not like a tournament as in, like I always give this analogy, okay? It's one that only people like me and you of our age will understand. You remember the famous movie, The Wizard, where that kid goes and he's like the best, secretly he's the best player at like Super Mario 3 or whatever the game was. It's an 80s movie. And what happens is they travel to, this big mega like tournament. And the idea is it's all these random people from around the world who are playing Mario and you just see who the best is. Like that's what I think a lot of people actually think esports is. They don't realize, you'll never get into that tournament if you're a complete random. It's like a Formula One thing, each circuit's like similar people. It's a top industry. Does new sports get that across?
Yeah, exactly. So let's go back to that because I can add a few that you may have experienced too. I say esports and they go, oh, EA Sports. Yeah, we know a lot about EA Sports, Madden. And I'm like, no, like, wow. Like, and even I recently had talked to a professional sports team and I'm not even going to tell you the league they're in because I don't want to put anybody on blast here. But they said, well, wait, what's League of Legends? And I just said, you know what? I really don't think this is for you yet. I think that you really need to do like some basic research before we even get to the point where you'll get this. And that's where new sports does, sort of clear up a lot of things. And I'll tell you why. It's a psychological shift in thinking because it uses the word new and sports, and that's literally what is being created. So it's a literal definition and it's also an ethos, which helps. So meaning it becomes a lot easier to explain everything that you just said that they have misconceptions on. Because now they're thinking in terms of sports, just sports, what they already know inside and out, better than anybody else. And then when you explain how it just merely blends technology, they go, well, I have a good understanding of technology. Okay. And when you get around talking about, sort of a lot of the hype that's around esports, I remember I read an article recently that had Michael Patcher, the analyst, and Dean Tuck. I don't want to ruin Dean's last name. It's been a long day, but great journalist for VentureBeat. And I remember reading that about like they think this is Michael thought this was the most overhyped thing in gaming this year, and I was like immediately offended. I'm like, what is he talking about? Overhyped? Is he And then I thought, wait a second, damn, he's right. You know what I mean? And because we don't have the necessary infrastructure for sustainability. So once you get them thinking in a new sports fashion, it's a lot more readily accepted. And to the point where one brand had told us it's a major brand in traditional sports. Everybody around the world knows them. And they said, Tob, we'll be candid with you. Esports will never be on brand for us, ever. New sports, that's on brand for us. That's something we could lead. How do we get involved? So that for me was like that was it. I was like, I need to share this with everybody. I could have kept it as a tactic, but I really put myself out there. I put my heart and my soul into that that piece, and I really wanted to put more in of the people that had built. And my original draft had like some players in there and some casters in there, and then I had to shorten it obviously to keep the points. But the overarching thing was like, listen, we all love this space. We all have benefited from this space, and that should be attacking these core issues should be the real thing. And this is a way to attack the issues, but also have the conversation where the brand or the sports team immediately thinks in a different vein and thinks in a different direction with a different POV and says, I can understand this now. And how do I learn about it? So it goes from having to talk them into it to them saying, I willingly would like to learn about it and come up with solutions.
When you say that line there, like esports isn't on brand for us, what is it that's putting them off about esports? Or what is their misconception that somehow when you change it into new sports, that it's not an issue or they can see it in a different way?
So I asked that exact question. I said, why isn't esports, on brand? And they said it intimates our company interprets that space as... and we know it's not, they said. We know it isn't, but everybody at the company here, has a different feeling about it. But the overall feeling is that it doesn't really embody athletics in the way that we see it. But we do recognize them as, we are starting to recognize them now as athletes. And we do understand that, while it's not watching Michael Jordan dunk a basketball or LeBron James dunk a basketball where you could see this great physical feat, we do recognize that they're doing amazing things. We just haven't been able to define what those things are so they translate in fast twitch muscle fiber. And, we went into actions per minute and APM and decision making, a lot of those things, a lot of physicality involved. They feel like physicality will be more involved in the future. They shared with me some technology around VR and AR that I was blown away from that I really said more about new sports. So I think that the ability to look into the future just a little bit and say, well, what are we going to segment the whole market and say now there's VR sports, now there's AR sports, and there's, like I said, whatever other R sports? That's ridiculous. Like, if we broaden the definition, there's a better output, and that's sort of what they get. I think that when we switch it to new sports, they see that future. So it's like, oh, this is where it's all heading anyway. This is a convergence from traditional sports and what we know today as esports. So new sports allows them to build a brand that says it's athletic. It's going to continue to be athletic. And while it may not be LeBron dunking a basketball, the kids and young adults that are watching this and passionate about it, they see what's amazing about it. And that's what we need to hone in on. New sports allows us to do that in a better way because it gets us thinking differently. And that was the thought exercise. That's them talking to me. So, I think that's where it starts to click. And again, Thorin, I think it sheds a lot of the preconceived notions they have.
How does it help to reconceptualize esports players as athletes? Because obviously part of, I think, the undercurrent of why people were so against this is so many esports people themselves used to try and define it as, we're not sports, we're not trying to be athletes. Obviously there's been somewhat cringy names in the past that were like e-athlete or cyber athlete. These have their own sort of negative connotations. How does it help when you're working with a brand, or hopefully in the future if it's on a bigger scale, how would it help to have the public or whoever conceptualize a player as an athlete?
I mean, that's one of the biggest challenges. And I think that when we invited FaZe Clan to IMG Academy, and, you had Lilia Russo developing that program, they came in, and the biggest evidence we had that wasn't really anecdotal that showed the athletic prowess was the fact that some of the players we put through the Dyna board, I don't want to get it wrong, but forgive me, but the board, basically it's a board that lights up and you have to, answer questions and press buttons in your peripheral vision. Okay. A lot of athletes use this. F-16 pilots use this to train, and it takes great coordination. We developed a correlation, a number, a metric that could measure how good a sniper would be in a game based on the score. And it was a one-to-one correlation. And one of the members that came from FaZe had smashed a record that was held by, I believe it was a quarterback that stayed on campus. And then he said, I think I can do better. And then he beat that record again. So for us, it was like we were starting to find evidence that they were athletes. And I got to be honest with you, if I'm being totally candid here, and I always am, I wasn't sold they were. It took a conversation for the impetus for this was a conversation with Rick Fox where he and I were just sort of having a debate on. I was like, well, it kind of almost feels like, is it golf in a sense where you're not running, but it still requires more athleticism than before. And look, golf took a big turn when Tiger came onto the tour and started dominating, right? People started looking at it like it's more athletic because there was athletic regiment around it. So I think that's a challenge that we have currently in the industry. But Rick convinced me, he goes, they're absolutely athletes. So here you've got a champion, that was at the top of the best brands in sports, not brands, teams, sports teams in the world, competing at the highest level, saying they're athletes. That had a big impact. So when we dove into it, it's like, yes, they are athletes. It's just the expression that we're used to seeing is different than a physical manifestation of dunking a basketball. But guess what? From what I'm learning from these brands and what I'm learning from these tech companies, that expression is going to change anyway. So if you look at the football and concussions and the concussion protocols and all those things, it's not hard to imagine that a VR solution or some type of AR solution or a technology solution, we'll call it, will manifest to keep players more safe. I don't know what that is, but in 20 years, we all know the game is going to look completely different than it is today. So, people are resistant to that change, but it's coming. So I think that I was one of those same people. I was cringy. If somebody else put out just the term new sports, I would probably be the one. I wouldn't go out and publicly crap on it, but I would also because I'm more of an open mind than now. Say, let's see how it goes. But I would be resistant myself. I was resistant to do it for the first time in the pitch. I get it, right? But I do believe that we are going to continue to figure out ways to highlight the athletic prowess that they have. And in the future, these are athletes of the future both ways, meaning traditional sports athletes are going to use more technology. And, the competitive gamers that we see now today may see more physicality. In other words, as we introduce VR and AR, maybe there is more of a physical component. But we know one thing, both are heading that direction very quickly.
Does this tie in terms of like the reason why the timing would make sense, or this as a branding exercise, with the fact that one of the reasons from my own perspective, I've noticed it seems like a lot of the traditional sports brands want to get involved. I don't even think it's that so many of them are so enamored with esports and they think it's going to be the future intent. It's that their own sport, they see kind of, the margins going down, things getting tighter. It's hard to find sort of new areas they're going to colonize. They see the average age of people watching goes up rather than they'd rather went down, obviously. Is the fact that kind of traditional sports is to some degree degrading or possibly dying something to do with this?
Something to do with them wanting to get in, you mean? So we're getting away from the name and saying,
well, is this a reason why it would make sense to build this as the new sport?
Look, so having meeting with a lot of the professional team owners, they're not afraid. That's the beauty of them, is they're very smart people and they recognize there's an issue. And, it's one of those things where it's not a hedge, right? They're not hedging a bet. They're saying, wow, this is going to be the future and we need to be involved because, we are seeing that metrics are changing and they're not going a great direction. I mean, I thought of this today as well, Thorin. What's interesting to me is I started thinking about venues, right? Think about venues for a second. Think about sports venues. Now, my great-grandfather had a much different experience going to a sports venue than my father did. And all I remember about going to a venue growing up in Pittsburgh was the parking's so expensive, the food's so expensive. The overall experience was terrible as an 8-year-old, right? That's my point. And so I was conditioned to love my local sports team, and I still do. But going to the stadium to watch an event wasn't the great experience. Now they've improved that a lot, right? A lot of people put in brand new stadiums. It feels, and they do a lot to improve it. But at the same time, tech has improved too. So what's the better experience? If I'm actually watching at home, I'm almost wondering to myself, are these venues going to follow the same suit as television has? In other words, television has a big problem with viewership, and Twitch proves it every single day that is the future. This streaming, this content, that's definitely it. And so as TV starts to see a decline, I wonder if that won't manifest in attendance. I mean, we see it in MLB. A lot of MLB stadiums are empty, right, until playoffs. So I think that's an interesting thought exercise. But to get back to your point, I think that they notice those things. I think they look at attendance. I think they look at TV. And even if everything's great with their organization, they can't deny that there's still an audience here. So they want to serve that audience. So even if things are on the up and going great, and there's an increase, an overall increase, a net increase, they still have to acknowledge that there's a massive fan base here and it's centered around competition. They are experts in competitive entertainment, and thus they need to be in there. I think they have general bad experiences because I think they're sold a bunch of hype. I think there's for every person out there that's being honest in a pitch, there's 10 that are overhyping it, and that's okay. They have to, because that's the effect of having to try to get a deal. But the reality is, once they get in, it's a bit of a rough go because they're not committing the front office and they're not committing the necessary resources. Honestly, I think just as in traditional sports, I think front office is going to play such a major key, because you might have the best players in the world, but if you don't have a great front office to support the organization, then it's going to be a problem. And I don't think that front offices should be segregated either, by the way. I think that the new sports front office works in conjunction with the traditional sports front office to create new products and incremental income from sponsors. Let me say that again: incremental income from sponsors. In other words, the sports team already have all the sponsors. Here's our new sports initiative. Real easy for the sponsor to understand, real easy for them to sell against, and real easy for the rest of the organization to get behind. So I think, and by the way, Thorin, I don't think when you say the community, guess what? I'm calling bullshit right now. If the fans go to an event and they have a blast and they have a great time and the players are happy and they get paid and the sponsors are happy, they see an ROI, then, you know, you could call it whatever you want to call it, and they're not going to care at the end of the day. You know, nobody cares that Fortnite is a battle royale game. They don't go the battle royale. They go Fortnite, right? They care about that. So it's whatever you create under this. It's not about, everyone's so focused on you're trying to change. I'm not trying to change the name. I'm trying to create new products that create a sustainable ecosystem that open up broader definition that allow for future technology. That's really what I'm trying to do for everybody to share in, right? Like I said, you know, they recognize the problem. They're upfront about it. They don't hide from it. And I think that's what's great about sports team ownership, because they recognize that they should be involved in this process. Their main problem is, I think publishers aren't giving them enough. From what I've heard from them, some of the complaints are like, you know, they're not getting a big enough say at the table. They don't have governance. You know, they're butting up against a model that they're not used to. They're used to, I mean, you said it best. Like, I quote you in the top of the very top of the manifesto, because it had such an impact on me when you said it. I was live in the audience, and it's a shame to admit this, but I don't have the time to sit for many panels after my panel and listen. I just leave because I have somewhere else to be or something else to do or somebody to get on the phone with. But I sat and I watched yours, and man, that really shook me, because it said, you know, that's exactly right, you know, and so now we're here, right? Where you were talking about then is here now, where the sports owners are now you've got esports with billionaires arguing over other billionaires. But I think the only arguing that sports team owners really do is on the field. I think they all get behind the business, and that's a big differentiator for esports.
Okay, so one thing you've alluded to already, which was interesting at the beginning, because it's just, to someone who doesn't know the nuance of this, it might sound like nothing, but I noticed when you've been talking about this concept of new sports, it hasn't just been like, we're going to take esports, it's now called new sports, business as usual, continue, everything's going to be fine. You have repeatedly alluded to the idea that, like, maybe some of this is about changing even the industry. So instead of being, for example, within a game where, you know, the game developer has the IP rights and he controls everything and he's the bottleneck, potentially, if you're looking at a massive sponsor getting involved and they hear like, oh, you know, I can't deal with you directly, I have to somehow work with this league. And is something to do with this also the idea that you can go around game developers, or is it still going to be through the traditional industry? What would you say to that aspect?
No, it's another great question. And I think, look, I really address that, where I say, look, the reason we are creating games ground up is because we are tired of having to lead the horse to water. You know, we've had to do it with all the, apart from Riot, you know, we've worked with all the publishers on different initiatives through various iterations, and it's painful. You've seen competitions. We've all seen competitions where patch day comes on the same day of a major competition. That's ridiculous. So, you know, it's not that there's certainly been improvements, but exactly right. The way the industry stands today is an esports industry. There is no doubt about that. I'm not saying we whitewash that and create new sports name and then everything is fine. It magically is a magic bullet. No, absolutely not. What I'm saying is we need to change the way esports is accidental success and a conglomerate of broken models that sort of amount to better game sales at the end of the day. That when you break it all down, that's what it is. I mean,
it's basically marketing for the game, right?
That's it. That's it. And so what I'm saying is, let's not worry about game sales anymore. Okay, we don't need to, because it's a different industry. There's a different driver. There's different ways to monetize. And if we get that component out of it, then at least we offer a different model. You know, I think that when you look at the space, I'm sort of just cutting to the chase, and I tell all the sports team owners the same thing. Listen, we're like Netflix. We are going to create our own games, yes, but we're also going to be a service to future publishers and current publishers that don't have the ability to create a cohesive league and esports expression despite having a great product. So it divorces the game industry from the competitive industry. under that new sports banner. That is the goal, because there can't be that friction and that tension of all times. Because, by the way, another thing you alluded to with the publishers was the sponsors that pay for all of this, and they're all fighting for the exact same sponsor. That is unsustainable. I'm sorry, that's not sustainable. So we have to make this evolution to create the sustainability. And by the way, that doesn't mean the current models don't still work. I mean, I think that I've had calls from all three major publishers really cheering me on, hoping that it's successful, because it really does help everybody. It doesn't mean that one model breaks all of a sudden and is replaced, but it does grant leverage to the team owners across the board. Meaning, if there's a franchise system right now in place, and those owners that may not be involved with me and my platform can now point and go, well, what about them? They get a percentage of game sales. They get part of the league, or more than just a small part of the league. They run the league. They govern the league. And so I think that, that those AAA publishers, they should not be afraid of that. They should be welcoming that and saying, okay, well, maybe and who knows, maybe the whole thing coalesces where we all get together and make something. That's my hope. And at least this opens the door for that to happen. And if that doesn't happen, then that's okay, also okay. But we do know that we have to grant leverage to the people that are paying for this and the people that have the expertise for this to get to where we want to go. You're not seeing F-16s flying over, esports events. That doesn't, right? So as much as we love them and they're great and everybody has a good time, these traditional sports teams still get a lot right, and the sponsors are still very happy doing business with them. And as you know, Thorin, in the business side of this, it all comes down to relationships. And guess who has the best relationships with those brands? The traditional sports teams. So we get them all rowing the same direction and not fighting with each other, and then throwing a publisher in that mix. I would venture to say that's going to be a sustainable, better output than what we have now.
Right. When I referenced that, when you put out the paper, there was certainly some pushback, some resistance from industry figures, people who've been around esports a long time or currently at the top of the industry, whatever particular aspect of their sort of niches within the industry. You referenced earlier, you yourself might be skeptical if you heard something like this. Were you prepared for some sort of backlash like that? Did you hope more people would kind of get the concept? I mean, as I referenced, some of the ones who were kind of against this, it sounded like a lot of them couldn't get past the semantics, just the name alone, just put them off, or even the concept of changing the name. That seems to be where some of them got stuck with the argument. What did you think of the backlash overall?
Oh man, I was just elated with the reception, and I mean that from the heart, because I'll tell you why. I sent it to very few people. I sent it to Craig Berry from Turner. I sent it to a couple other writers that I really respect. I mean, I would say total people I sent to before, when I was kicking around the idea of publishing it, was about 6, and that was from some industry heads as well. And I started the email with, I completely know that this is going to get eviscerated. I know it is. I can remember doing ELEAGUE and having everybody getting really excited about when it was about to debut, and everyone say, oh, they're going to love it, they're going to love it, they're going to love it. And I go, hold it, stop, they're going to hate it. That's how I start with everything, because it's the internet. So I expected to be eviscerated. And if I could tell a story real quick, sure. it was I tried to kind of warn. I DM'd some of the people and said, listen, I'm A-okay with the debate and with you being contrary to it, but the direction you're going, I tried to warn them and say, there is immediate success that you're going to see from this. Just to give them, because I didn't want to, I'm not going to go and have a nasty back and forth. I want to give everybody the benefit of the doubt, because like I said, I know how I would have responded to it. So I tried to give a heads up to some people that were sort of on the pushback, just to be ultra fair, because what I knew was when I put out the original press release before the manifesto came out, that sounds like such a bad word, like such an evil word. I hate manifesto, I really do. But when I put the original press release out, the CEO of HyperIce read it and was very inspired and flew in and met me, and it reminded me of sort of like the scene from Step Brothers, where it was like, did we just become best friends? Yep. But what happened was, he said, I really love everything you're saying about new sports. Now, mind you, this is before I put out the long form, the reason behind why I'm calling it. This was just off the press release. And so I said, it's interesting because you really don't know what you're in for. I said, it's going to take a lot of bravery if you really want to come in. He says, no, I want to make products for these athletes. I see it now. I get it. New sports is amazing, and I want to be a part of that. And I want to help lead it. And I really think of that I can help this industry. I don't know anybody else that's really focused on recovery. And we even got to talk about streamers. Like, if you're sitting there and you're streaming all day, what products are available to make sure, because your body is your tool. So, it's really important to stay healthy, and it's really important to have, I think, focus on products that you're going to need in the future, whether you're a competitor or a streamer or whatever. So, but I did tell him, I said, you're going to have to be brave, because the community, there's a group of people within the community that just automatically don't like things, and they're going to go out of their way to shame it. They're going to go out of their way to resist it. They're going to go out of their way to call it crazy. And some of them have an interest, a self-interest in this, because they like the way things are and they don't want a disruption, because they maybe have an affiliation to a AAA publisher, or maybe they write contracts for a team, or all these things, but not realizing it's probably going to benefit them the most. But the CEO said to me, he says to me, how's this for Brave kind of thing? And he hands me a press release. And that press release went out today. And, we're going to see more on it tomorrow. And it's one of those situations where I thought, wow, he is really invested, despite me warning him that this is going to be tough, that people are not going to like this. He's still in. Now let's break down what just happened. A traditional sports brand flew in, met with me, inspired by like sort of the term, said, I want in. I said, try to talk him out of it, and said, let's see how it goes first. And he said, nope, I'm fully in, and I'm inspired to create products for these athletes. And I don't think we should discriminate just to traditional sports. I think new sports athletes deserve these products and deserve the attention that we can give and the resources that we can commit, because without them, there is no show. There is nothing to sponsor. And so we need to keep them healthy. And so for me, I was like, wow, there's not a better personification of, a use case. And I say use case because I'm not going to use the word, ultimate success, because it isn't. One brand does not create ultimate success. But I also happen to know of a few things that haven't been announced yet in the pipeline around traditional sports brands that are getting behind this narrative, that are really great, because it's about inclusion and it's about creation. So the reason I tell that story is because, I knew that we were going to do the release, and I still didn't pound it down. I didn't want to go, people are free to express their opinion, and I want to hear them. I want the feedback. This is not about I'm right, you're wrong. If I did that, I'd be completely hypocritical in the sense that, it flies in the face of everything I want to create under that new sports banner. It's about getting rid of that judgment and that notion. And that goes both ways, meaning that Hyperice is in, and that's wonderful, and they're supporting the federation, and that's great. And we had a brand announcement before we had a traditional sports team announcement, and that's another rarity. So, it boils down to, the fact that I believe strongly that this is going to resonate. And the naysayers, I love, and people say, well, do you use them as motivation? So getting back to what you asked about the reaction, I don't use that as motivation, because I don't need any more motivation than I currently have. What I do appreciate from all of even the name calling and the venom, which is silly. I mean, and here's the sad part, Thorin. Here's the real sad part. Hyperice, they're not the only brand looking at this, right? So now, some of the people that are old enough to know better in that thread, saying the things that they're saying, they only damaged themselves, and they only damaged people they work with, because it was pointed out that, we are not going to work with that person, because that is just short of, I don't want to get into it, but the point is that they only hurt themselves when they do that. For me, though, the reason I appreciate it is because I need accountability, right? So I know that I'm putting myself way out there here, and it's a big swing, and and if I fail, that's okay too. But and then they can have a great time making fun of me and making jokes, and he finally wasn't able to deliver. They can say, and that'll be all right. I dust myself off, and continue to disrupt and create and be positive. But I don't use it for motivation. I use it as sort of a daily affirmation to make sure we deliver. So I was happy though. I thought there was going to be a lot worse. I really did. Hector really came out from Optic, and his sort of. And I'll be completely honest with you here. I ran it by. I said what I was going to do. I was so worried about the evisceration that I wouldn't get a fair shot, because so many times we don't give people a fair shot. Even me, like, what more could I do to prove that I love this industry, right? I put all of my personal money into it from day one. I almost went broke. It was a long slog. I took shots all the time. Never got any sleep building that first business, as you don't. And I did it advocating for everybody else. And then, I've paid for players I've never met before to go, from Europe to the States, and and I've never gone ahead and expected anything back, and I've actually never talked to them. I would do anything to help out, basically. And if I haven't proven that by now, I think that would be my only disappointment from the feedback, is like some of the people should have didn't give me credit for what I had done in the past, which is A-okay, because every time you have to start over from the ground up. I just happen to do it sort of habitually at this point. If I see something that I think we can build better, I'm going to go do that and put myself out there. So it was, I'm kind of thinking through this as you asked it. I was elated at the reaction. I was getting into an admission. Because I am very candid. I said at one point, I said, well, maybe what I'll do is, and I talked to an influencer. I said, maybe what I'll do is I'll give this to a bunch of influencers, and if they agree with it only. And I got to say this because people are going to take this out of context. People are you might say, why would you admit this? And I do it because I'm being candid. I was so concerned with that feedback that I thought, well, if an influencer agrees, maybe we'll do a campaign with them, right, around the whole new sports theme. And, obviously we would have to pay for that advertising. But that wouldn't be a very organic representation. And, a very close friend of mine talked me out of it. In about 2 seconds, and said, look, I like all your ideas, but I think that's disingenuous. And so we didn't do it. So instead, I went ahead and I put it out there sort of for the world to see. And again, I was elated from the support that I got and the phone calls that I got, specifically from people that, aren't allowed because of who they work for to come out and publicly support it. But just, phone call after phone call. And it was wonderful. And then also the public support that I got. And I'll wrap up on this because I know I got too long-winded on it, but I'll be honest with you, Thorin. The thing I loved best was anybody that's created something before in the space ground up as a business, whether, the agency, the league, whatever, anybody that has built something like that ground up that has had real success in the space. So if it was Sundance or if it was Sepso or, Hector, or, those likes that came in and retweets and support meant more, and a million people could have hated it. But the fact that these people that I respect so much sort of liked it and supported it, well, that meant the world to me. That drowned out any of the negativity and kept me on point for positive.
Okay, what about this then? Since these people, like I said, weren't really willing to engage the ideas beyond a few snippy tweets, and some people, even their way of engaging it was to say, like, I think this is a bad idea and I don't want to talk about it and it's not worth my time. What about this then? I'll put some of the basic criticisms to you and you just react and tell me what you would say in response. But obviously Great. I'll do it in hopefully a more polite manner than they would. So okay. What about this then? In terms of the name, some people say it's too vague because if it's used in common parlance, it's that new sports team. They're like, what, a new sports team? What's a traditional sports team, but a new, people thought that it might get confusing. You explained before why the connection to where new media is used, and obviously you want to get the sports aspect for the concept. So is it too vague a name? What would you say to that?
I'd say it's meant to be broad because it has to allow for the future. So we don't know what the future holds. We just have some hints. So again, we don't want VR, AR, whatever other R sports, and then they're all divided and everyone's got a different pitch. I think it's a great container for all of that. And I think that the important people that get it are the stewards of the competitive entertainment industry so far. So let's face it, they set the trends anyway, right? So tomorrow they start using just that, it's a lot easier to see. And I would say this, it's vague because you haven't seen it come into focus yet, because it's so fresh and so new. You're operating on today and previous, today and the past. You're not operating on what comes next. And if you just look into the immediate future, I think you'll find out that it actually is a great definition. And because it literally, we are making, if you look at a stadium that's packed and they're cheering and everything, and if you don't look at the stage, there's no way to say that that's not a sport. I mean, it could be basketball they're watching, it could be boxing, it could be hockey, and it could be any of those things. If you look at the fan reaction, it certainly looks like a sport to me. So, I think that it's as it comes into focus and they see it start to align with some of the solutions, again, like Hyperice, I think that then it'll be more generally accepted. And I get that, by the way. I totally understand where they're coming from there.
What about the people who say esports as a term has been around a long time now? It's very connected. And in fact, the fact that there wasn't, one person who said it's going to be called esports, somehow, no one really knows how, actually. I mean, I don't myself, I was there. No one really knows who did decide on it or how it kind of gained some sort of a certain critical mass that it became esports instead of, competitive gaming. I mean, you still see obviously now occasionally called e-gaming, all these different names. What would you say to that it's too established as a name to try and use something else?
That's what disruption's all about. I mean, I think if there's a better way to do something and it works, use it. You don't, I mean, there were people that made horseshoes too for the longest time. Great business was, creating horseshoes and shoeing a horse. I don't see too many of them around anymore. So things evolve and things change. I think, again, if it's something that works, well, why question it? But also, I want to be clear here, and I said this is a direction I am taking my company. This is an ethos that I'm going to live by, and I am A-okay being the only guy doing this. And it's, it's what I'm building it on. Now, I would say that I didn't want to, I could have trademarked this and just used it as a marketing spin and, probably would be regarded as pretty smart if I got 2 or 3 more brands in here behind that. That would be it. And it'd be like, look, you'd have a bunch of different sort of talking points around why it worked already. But I believe that this should be for everybody to use, because you know why, Thorin? Here's what people don't know. And I'm not going to mention their names. They may mention them, actually. They may chime in on this. There are people from all of the publishers that agree with this. There are people from all the publishers that said we need a name change. A lot of the esports team owners have told me we need a name change. So this has been something that the community can't possibly react to. So when you ask that question, they don't have all the information. They don't know that the industry leaders are saying, we need a change. This is an issue. So, I think it would be quite interesting to monitor this and find who else comes on board. I didn't want to just hold it up for myself, though. I do believe that if I'm having success with it, I hope everybody has success with it.
Right. What about if someone says, well, if there's some sort of a brand or an exec or some kind of person involved with the market department, whichever aspect and hierarchy, wherever they are in the company, who doesn't get the concept of esports, and then you tell them about this new sports thing, then, they're thinking as if it's a trick. Like, is it that valuable if this person's too kind of not prescient enough to see that esports has value? Are they really going to see that the new sports term has some different connotation to it? What would you say to that?
Absolutely. I mean, look, I've used it, right? I've had again, I always use this analogy. It's like an esports event. When you have somebody that doesn't get, like my mom had no clue, right? My mother's a perfect example. She was, she's probably one of the biggest Steelers fans that there is. And she came to Columbus to an MLG event. Wow, it was a while ago.
Probably the major, right? March 2016.
No, she did come to that. She did come to that. Yes. No, this is before that. This is
when they used to have it at the arena. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so she was blown away, and she said, "I didn't get it before. Now I get it." She goes, Actually, she goes, this is just like sports. She goes, you know what? I don't like that guy. He's got a really bad attitude and he's mean. But this guy, he's awesome. Like that's like the all-American kid right there. He's really cool. And I said, see, she's already picked out the villain, the hero. She's already telling the sports story that currently sort of we celebrate in traditional sports. So my point here is she got it. She got it because she experienced it. I would say the same thing for new sports. And I'm going to remind everybody that it's not about the fans here. This is a business thing. This is about the industry leaders saying that, yeah, we could develop better products under a new banner and it will make sense. And we could coalesce here and all row the same direction. Because esports is currently fragmented. So I would say that much the same way that people get esports that don't get it when they step into the experience in terms of a live event as a fan, it's the same exact thing in the board. Whereas use the word, use the term, but don't just half-ass it, like commit and watch the change. I mean, we're not talking about one or two brands here, right? Or one or two sports team owners. It's really been an amazing sort of, or I wouldn't have put myself out there, right? I mean, again, I would have trademarked it. I would have used it in, which I don't even know if you could trademark it, but my point is I would have just kept this for myself as a tactic in the boardroom, but it could be so much more than that. It is so much more than that. And I really do believe, if you believe this is sports, or it's great it's great competitive entertainment and it's new sport. It is so much easier for them to understand. So I would just say, use it in practice and judge for yourself.
What if someone says the esports industry has already grown a lot, it's doing really great now, it's still growing, we don't need it, it'll get there without it, it'll become its own thing? What would you say to that?
Great. Well, then where's I don't want to call brands out because I consult for a lot of them, but let's put it this way. There are more that are resistant to getting in still that we've been talking about dipping our toe in with, brands have been talking about, rather not we, but brands have been talking about, quote unquote, dipping their toe in for 5 years, the same brands dipping their toe. And the biggest thing for me is I would challenge that by saying the evidence I have is traditional sports brands wouldn't touch it. And there's some small little things here and there, and they're test and learns, but they wouldn't touch it despite the audience, because they're having a hard time getting their head around it. So I would say that what you think is actual success, you're wrong. Because you want to talk about growth. Okay, let's talk about growth. How many teams make money? You know what I mean? How many esports teams actually make money? And you want to talk about, we have this great audience. You want to talk about profits in the business side and it's working in growth. Oh yeah, there's a lot of growth. All the growth are the fans and the eyeballs and the viewership. That's a lot of growth. And guess what? That growth is not getting or generating the money it should. So, anybody on the business side can agree to that. There is not a single person that's saying, I am doing so well right now in this space, apart from Thorin, apart from the publishers, right? Apart from the publishers, nobody is saying, I am doing so, I don't even need any more sponsors. I don't even want any more sponsors. It's working so great. Well, okay, then how come we have all these eyeballs and everybody's asking Twitch to pay for everything? If we're doing so great, why is everybody asking Twitch to pay for everything?
There are a lot of people in esports who want to present themselves as a pioneer, or they were there at the beginning. What about if someone says, is there an element of this where Toby just wants to be able to say, oh, it's called new sports. I invented that, actually. I came up with that term. I was the visionary. What would you say to that?
Okay. Again, being totally candid, it makes me laugh because we did a bit of it wasn't very nice. It wasn't nice. It was good fun. It wasn't like I was being mean. But somebody had said, hey, you should put like New Sports Pioneer in your Twitter profile because it'll really make everybody go crazy. Like the haters are really going to hate on that if you go ahead and deem yourself a new sports pioneer. And So I was back and forth. I go, you know what? I'm going to get killed on it anyway. Let's go for it. And sure enough, it worked like a charm. There was the few haters so it was funny because the only people that even noticed that I did it were sort of the same old guard that are just sort of crotchety, rough, just like hate everything, hate negative, bad, terrible. And by the way, if I want to call myself a new sports, who the hell cares? At the end, who cares? Who cares if I call myself? Who cares if I do it or if I don't? If it's successful or if it's not. If it's successful and everybody makes money, does anybody care? What do they think? I'm going to go make a parade for myself and say, I'm so smart, look at me? I've made as many mistakes as anybody in the industry. That's how we learn. That's how we improve, period. So I would say, look, again, I would have trademarked it. I would have came up with an entire marketing campaign around it. And I certainly wouldn't have put out that manifesto. That thing was from the heart. That was not a marketing exercise. That wasn't engineer. That was me at the computer writing, rewriting, and just really coming from putting all of my heart and soul into what I believe. And naturally, people are going to tear that down. So, I would have if I wanted to keep this for myself, I would have went a completely different angle. If it's adopted, that's fine. It's all anecdotal. If everyone's having, basically, here's an even better one. I would say to that, the scenario I hope happens is that some business or company is created out of this, and it's that they get credit for the name because it's like they do it so well that everybody just assumes that News Sports was theirs. Like that nothing would make me happier. I could care less. That I would say that I did see a couple of people say that, and I did bring that on myself a little bit for fun. And sure enough, it was the people I expected to do it, and it's okay. I had since changed it actually on my profile. I think it says now like a Foundry IV, a new sports platform, because that is the whole point. I sort of anticipated people to say, he just went. And by the way, I do have to say, I do have pride of ownership on one thing, and that is disruption and being creative in the space. I do. But the older I get, the more I start to realize is it doesn't matter if you're first. It really doesn't, unless you're racing. Right? But it's like it's less about that, and it's more about just seeing the success of the industry on a bigger level for sustainability.
Right. What about this then? As a last criticism, if people were to say, okay, even if you go out there and you pitch people this term and you use this term yourself, and some people get it, esports, the industry at least, the actual top level of the industry, the big names, is still a pretty small group of people. It's very cliquish. A lot of them, as I've alluded to before, they very much pride themselves on the idea. I was here from the beginning. I was an influencer. I've been here for this, for that. I have a lot of say in these things. My opinions are important. If those people don't get on board, will that in any way inhibit this or make it more difficult or put people off the term?
No, I mean, I think maybe there might be a small perception here or there. It might influence a writer one way or another to do a story or something like that. But and I mean, and I include myself in this. Okay, we matter less and less the more the sports teams come in, because they have all of this, right? So again, when I said I was cutting to the chase with how we were sort of creating our platform and saying that, look, you're going to own the IP. It's going to be very familiar to you and do things that you currently do. And we can spin off cottage industry, and people can build businesses that are a satellite around this that don't have to go through the publisher for permission and can't get inhibited by the publisher. I would say the idea is more powerful than the naysayers, those few naysayers. And by the way, again, the people that supported this are people that have created things before that have been successful. So, again, whether it was the list, the litany of people I mean, you can go through and see. And I think that, and then there was another section of people that just said, hey man, back off and give it a shot. Like, wait more than 24 hours. There's an element of that too. So I think that people that used to be massive decision makers in the space haven't challenged themselves to evolve, haven't put themselves out there, haven't tried to evolve. And they're actually, you know what it is, Thorin? They're insecure. It's insecurity that somehow I'm going to matter less in a new sports era. Esports is my thing. I own that. Great, you can have it. It's yours. Take it. This is new sports. And that's what I would say to that. Like, I don't think it detracts at all. I think that, the idea is bigger than just any type of sort of cabal that would be created around, negativity. And new sports is a fresh opportunity for everybody to work together, including, Blizzard, Activision, Riot, and Valve, and every independent game maker out there as well. And those moments come few and far between, to where you can create something to, be inclusive. But I also believe that the other side of that is, there is a whole host. Everybody, again, looks at today backwards. There's a whole host of independent game developers we talk to, current game developers we talk to, endemic sponsors even, that are behind it. And so I think that, looking to the future, those people get to write the next stories. And, perhaps they like it better, perhaps they don't, but we won't see it come into fruition, overnight. And I don't want to get, and everybody expects results right away. And Hyperice, I believe, is the great step forward, and couldn't have picked a better brand to be the first in. But by the same token, there's so much more to do. It's a long road ahead, and it has to come into vision for everybody. So I don't think that those people, I think that the few people that just want to just immediately discredit it, it was a small space, but I will echo what I said earlier, which is, it's gotten to what you called before, which is, the traditional sports space of billionaires arguing with other millionaires. Well, they're here now. So our space has really gotten out there. And unless you're having these conversations, you don't understand how far we've come and how wide it is, and how much work there is left to be done, more importantly.
Right. To close up, to wrap the topic up, like, people can either look at what I'm about to ask in one or two ways, probably. Either it's a chance to show that, if this becomes something big, this will be one of the first interviews, and you can give kind of a bit of a prognostication on what you think might happen. Or perhaps cynically, as an interviewer, I'm giving you enough rope to hang yourself, and this will be a hilarious thing people will link 2 years from now. In years from now, Toby, will this be the new name for esports? Or will this be what, as you're saying, big brands, this is how they conceive of it? And maybe even the term esports still exists, but this is how you explain something to someone. This is how they themselves market it, label it. Will it become a massive phenomenon? It's going to snowball?
I mean, I certainly hope so. And I don't just hope so because my name's on the line. Like I said, I can fall and I'll dust myself. It won't be the first time. But it's a really tough question, Thorin. I'll tell you why. I do pride myself on predictions in the space. And most recently, I think that's why I have the ear of so many sports team owners and brands. Because I'll say, hey, look at this and watch this. And they'll go, I don't even understand what it's this right now. And I go, yeah, it's this right now, but watch, it's going to be this tomorrow. And then it is. And that's why I'm able to constantly cultivate all these relationships, because I spend the time, and my team spends the time doing the research around it. So I'm proud of the ability to predict. This one's hard to predict because I can't get out of my own way on it. And you're right. And by the way, if it doesn't work in terms of a broader reach, then great. They can still try to pitch esports. So I would go with this, thinking it through. Yeah, of course it's going to work and snowball. Absolutely, because it's going to be successful because Foundry is going to be successful, and the companies that work with Foundry are going to see a great ROI, because the bottom line is we deliver. You know what? You know how I know it'll work? The same people that told me not to open the agency. You're too early. You're going to waste your money. It'll never work. Wrong, right? Sold to WME IMG. Ari Emanuel, he's the top of that food chain. He's the best of the best. There's no doubt. So, I was able to achieve that. And, one day I'll release an interview archive just like this one that we're doing, where there's an interesting prediction that I made that happened. And I don't want to do it yet. We've been saving it, but, it manifested when I went to do ELEAGUE. The first team I called was a European team, and they said, this will never work. We'll never play in it. We refuse to get on board. There's no way what you're saying can ever come to light. Impossible. But by the way, would you help us get sponsors? So it was very funny. It was exactly what was said. And that team did show, and all the European teams did show. But everybody told me, not going to work. It'll never work. You'll never get a major. It'll never get a major. And by the way, I'm not taking credit. All the credit, believe me. Me, Simon, Lily, we all did a lot of work on the front end of that to get people bought in. And what was great about WME-IMG and Turner was they gave us the freedom. They never checked up on us on terms of leaning over our shoulder. They just let us do what we had to do to sell that vision through to the teams, to get everybody involved and unified. When a lot of people were trying to stop it, Thorin, there's a lot of existing third parties out there that were really insecure and trying to throw money at stopping it and lies and everything else. And I don't hold it against them. I get it. It's business. It's not the way I choose to do business, but it worked. It worked. And there were some Emmy nominations in there, and that's through the hard work of Craig Berry, and Christina did a great job. I think when she inherited a very hard job that she walked into over there, and and they continue to evolve it. But certainly I was very proud of the fact that we brought that to fruition when everybody again said it wouldn't work. And then the sports teams, everybody told me there's no way, it's too early to get in. They're not going to get in. They're not going to understand it. No way. Met with Scott O'Neill, had some great conversations, and was definitely part of the advocacy group, and sort of got them down the road on education to where, income's dignitas. And then, Steve was working really hard over at Liquid, and he brought in, and I actually also shared a conversation with Peter Guber at his house a few years ago. And then now all of a sudden they started to bring in some sports teams, and that they fell like dominoes. So, in the most modest way possible, I'm going to say it's going to be successful because we're going to deliver. We're going to deliver a better product. We're going to deliver a better system for players. We're going to develop a better economy for the industry in general. And most importantly, I think we're going to develop a better experience for fans. I mean, everybody, when you look at observer modes, they're usually, so a game comes out and the observer mode is probably last on the list, right? And we've seen it. Yet you have forums of people just screaming, you need to do this, you need to do that. And they're very good. It's very good feedback. But, again, AAA publishers tend to shy away from that because they're making what they're making. And they have their product pipeline built and all that. And I think we look to change that a little bit, which I believe will then start to change and open the mind of the AAA publishers also, which is great. So yeah, everybody benefits. Why wouldn't it be successful? Yes, it'll be successful. And yes, it's going to be, I think a big win for everybody involved.
This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Gardner Wilson, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Alex Adams, Daniel Yordanov, TTMXMP, VeXii, HawpT, Robert Baxter, and Travis Greb, with a special thanks going out to Jerky's Minion. Want teasers for my upcoming content? To ask a question for my monthly AMA? How about taking part in a discussion with me about esports? Or perhaps you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Become a part of the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.